It's really an honor to give this brief introduction to Tony, and as Ivan said, only 3 minutes will be good. And I'm glad to do it in only 3 minutes because I experienced an interview with Tony a couple of weeks ago, which is now present in the A+ magazine. And what happened was that we put questions on the table, but all the times Tony kept on talking about, not only about the projects, but also about his experience of being an architect and how this experience was reorientated during the whole time he has his office until now. So 3 minutes is fairly enough because we have to listen to Tony, although I like to stress on some personal things because as why we talked also with Tony Fretton on our opening has to do with the fact that the work of Tony is quite a reference for us a long time. And why it's a reference, I just want to share some personal points to this. I think, first of all, as I was a young architect in the 90s, I discovered the work of Tony not only by the work itself, but also by the drawings of Tony Fretton. And I was always amazed by these beautiful handmade drawings, and later on I could say he made this kind of mouse-made drawings as he manipulated AutoCAD towards making drawings. And I was, at that point as a young architect, it was like Tony was pointing me back to the table of making the drawing to make a process clear, not only towards clients or whatever, but especially to yourself as architect. Second, I just take one project, and I can tell this about many projects, but there is one project which is still in my back head real reference. It's the project in the Lutke Nieuwstraat, Groningen, in which he stated when he explained the project to the city, I could find back in a text that he stated at a certain point, and it's, I will tell what he says, he would make a usable building that played a long-term role in the city. In fact, you have to go and check up that building, maybe he will show it, I don't know, but it's where it's about in the work of Tony. It's about that house, about those apartments, about this room, and on the other hand, about how those things are placed into the city. It's a very small issue, but it's still a reference when we think in our practice about architecture. And a third thing I want to share with you is in that same book I found back an interview in which Tony said just one thing. It was a particular question. I won't repeat the question, but the answer was, or partly the answer was, and I will state the sentence, aesthetics and taste are a factor of human nature. To be honest, I'm really glad that when we talk about architecture, this still can be said, and this has to be said at all, aesthetics. Tony, yesterday I was walking in Listen Gallery, and at the end I walked outside and looked back to the facade, and I really felt what I asked you in the interview, teach me. I think when I look to the facades, I want to admit that it definitely has designed also our ways of thinking on architecture.
Thanks. Does this one work? This one works too. Either one back. Jan, you're very kind. He doesn't need to be taught. He can do what we all do, which is to steal off of other people, which is what I do too. Because I'm late, I won't really develop a theoretical position before I start. I'll just talk about the projects and what I think and how I think will become apparent as I do that. But one thing I wanted to say, which comes from a book that I'm writing called Buildings and Their Territories, which was going to be published by Burkhauser, but they've just gone bankrupt, so it will be published by somebody. And in that book I say that I'm not primarily interested in architecture in the sense of interested in its history and internal rules. I'm much more interested in making, or I'm much more interested in the urge to make. The urge to make that I see in myself, in ordinary people who make things unconsciously, but also in the very specific form of making in the arts, in architecture and painting. So I'll give you that thought and hope that it will make some sense and show you some slides instead. Actually, I'll just show you the Red House. The Red House, which is in Chelsea. This lecture will start in London and it will finish in Deinze. So it begins with this project. Let me see if I can make this work. Yes, I can make this work. This house, which is, let me check if the slides are good. Oh well, bear with me. Red House, which is here in Chelsea, which is, thank you, which is a sort of bohemian neighborhood from the 19th century, and a house for a young millionaire, which London has many. I mean, London is particular in that it's had a huge inflow of people with money. It's not unusual to build a very expensive house if you can find the site, and this is one of those houses. And it's of course, you know, it looks like architecture, but it also deals with chance. I'm very interested in how chance occurrences in the surroundings, which happen unconsciously, which are made unconsciously. I'm interested in that kind of richness, and throughout the projects, you'll see that as an interest. And for example, here, this house is in front of the plane of that house by a kind of accident. So, in very simple terms, and I think often urbanistic gestures can be extremely simple. This part of the facade is, sorry, I'm shaking, look. I've been traveling, sorry, forgive me. This part of the facade is aligns with that, and this aligns with that. And while the rest of the street is very flat, you know, the facades are very flat, it allows this facade to be much more plastic. So, in a way, from these kinds of simple observations, I'm able to make an architecture which is unusual and yet familiar. And so, familiarity and difference are very important to me, and have developed as a motif in the work. Familiarity in the sense that a communication, you know, and to make an architecture in which people recognize things, but also an architecture which has the quality of strangeness and newness which provocative pieces of work should have. And it's made of red stone. It's slightly less red these days. Bronze windows. This garage door is stone. It reveals a Maserati and in a decorated room to really annoy the neighbors. And it has a staircase in the entrance hall. I'll show you a plan a little later. A staircase which, the technology of the staircase was developed in the time of Palladio. You know, it's a staircase which is effectively an inclined column, and it means the underside of the stair and the tread of the stair are all in stone. So let's say things that were made in the past and which still have relevance to the present interest me very much. And many architects today, many leading architects like OMA, are fully concerned with the new. And you need that. You need people who are stylistic innovators. But I'm not. I'm interested in a broader range of qualities. I'm interested in how the new comes from what exists. Because of course, OMA or any other architect draws on the kind of knowledge that people have of buildings simply in order that people will recognize their building as a building. But so those architects, in common with all stylistic innovators, will use motifs from the past and then eliminate the evidence. But I don't. I'm much more interested in how familiarity can play. You know, this dining room, which projects at the back of the house, has a rather distorted Miesian quality. And throughout the house, as I show you, you'll see that there are stylistic directions, very different stylistic directions, and yet none of them are brought to a conclusion within the rules of that style. So my instinct as a designer is to produce a calculated ambiguity, to make architectural things which look recognizable, but actually are not. You know, in the end, they're not. There's something else. And just to add another layer to this, some of these elements in the building are by my colleague at Delft, Mark Pimlott, a very, very talented interiorist. And the room on the first floor, he's designed a ceiling which the room has to contain a number of very large paintings. And the question was, from my side, was how this could be achieved, how we could light it electrically without an array of spotlights on the ceiling. So collectively, Mark and I made this ceiling, which was a series of waves with cuts on the side so that the light is concealed. And you can see that this room, to an extent, is an Italianate room, and even the ceiling is an Italianate ceiling. You know, not consciously, but it has similarity to certain types of Italian painting and slash canvases of the 60s. So I, like all architects, absorb things, unconsciously transform them and put them into my work. But none of this, in my view, comes to, it never fully culminates in the original style. Now, the bay window that you saw on the front is like this. And this is a photograph by Hélène Binet, the photographer who I used to work with quite consistently, very beautiful photographer. And this shows, it's hard to see, but it shows an oblique view of the River Thames. But what I want to say is that many of the spaces in this house are, it's not a functionalist house because it's too big. It's a sort of small palace. And so this is a place where people do work. These kinds of spaces are spaces which people enjoy using. And so the attitude to space making is that in this house and in other places, the rooms are given their character by the way that they look out, by their incidents, small and near, and they are places which don't have fixed functions, but suggest use. And that is, let's say, a way of going back beyond the modern, behind the modern movement to find another motivation for space making. And on the back of the house, there's a balcony, which the big room that we looked at is here, just to orientate you. And the dining room is here. And so from the back of the house, there's a balcony which looks out over the, I haven't got a photograph, but it looks out over the grounds of Christopher Wren's Royal Hospital. But the roof of the dining room is sort of parterre, which now has plants in it. And you look down into the garden. So in this house, you're constantly or frequently looking back on parts of it south from other positions. And I'll show you in the section where this is, but through the house there's a sort of library where my client and his wife work, and it has a window at this end, a window at the other end, which looks out to the surrounding neighborhood. And the top floor is perhaps the most startling. This is by Mark. This is a plastic wash basin, and you can see there's a garden here. The bedrooms are arranged around gardens, and let's just go back. The objective here is to make the bedrooms be dream spaces, and a slide that I will show in a short while shows that this courtyard, in fact, is the idea is that you get from bed to the outdoors, and there's no architecture intervening. You know, sometimes you can take the architecture away and let the spaces do the work. But this house has recently been altered. You know, this happens. The house has been around for 10 years. Mark has put a different bath in from the original one, and it's a rather beautiful object, and wallpaper So this house, it's growing. You know, the owner is altering it as we speak in a rather beautiful way. You can see the bath here, and then there's a balcony out. Oh, sorry, a roof terrace, and you know, a curtain. Whereas the client got tired of being seen by the entire neighborhood lying in the bath, so the curtain. And originally, the roof garden had a hot tub, an outdoor hot tub, but it doesn't anymore. It's a garden, so things change. And this project will change into the next project. Well, it won't. I'll show you the plan, sorry. So the first photograph was of this facade. There's the bay window. And you come in through here to the area with the stair, that's the garage. And then the dining room projects out in the back. That's the big room with a tiny room, which I didn't show, and that's the balcony, the library, and then the bedrooms, that's the courtyard, the roof courtyard. And the sections, this isn't a house of modern movement. It's not a house of flowing spaces. It's a series of rooms. And its attitude structure is irrational. You know, you wouldn't really, in your right minds, put a huge roof garden and originally a tropical hothouse above a giant room like that. But the structure is at the service of the spaces. It's about a series of rooms which give one large room has a small room next to it, so that you rediscover the scale of the larger room constantly as you move around the house. Now, we swore that we wouldn't do another private house after that, and then Anish Kapoor appeared and said, would we like to do another one? And we said, would you like to look at some other architects? And he did, and then he came back and he said, I want you to do my house. And then the fun began. I mean, he's great, but working with artists with large egos is a very interesting experience, you know. And there was a particular moment, I'll show you the object that we talk about, but there was a particular moment when Anish said, a courtyard that we made, should it not look more like an independent object? And I said, let me tell you about the difference between art and architecture. An art object is made and is seen in very controlled surroundings. Even the coffee bean that Anish made in Chicago is positioned with great care. So there's a great deal of control about the way that the art object is seen. And also art objects are seen for a very short time. You know, the viewer might look at an art object for a maximum of 15 minutes. I said, but architecture is used, so it has to have the capacity to sometimes look like an aesthetic object, but at other times to be a background to your daily life. That's the difference, and he rather charmingly didn't fire us, so there we were. But where is Anish's house? Where is Anish Kapoor's house? Well, Anish Kapoor's house is in the ground floor of this apartment building. He had to buy all of these leases in order to obtain a very, very long piece of land, and I'll show you the plan in a second. So that's the entrance, and that's the garage door. In the middle, there's the staircase, which goes up to these people. So it's rather modest at the front. On the back, it has more of a presence. There's an alley at the back, which that's the back of the house, and it's a little bit more comprehensible on plan. So as we see, the first view was from here, and the second view was from here. And the plan, what Anish and Susanna wanted, Susanna, his wife, and their two children, what Anish and Susanna wanted was a space which they could live in, they could entertain in, he could have his collection of artworks. He has very beautiful Dan Graham, which is in the space, looks fantastic. And so the big ground floor room was supremely important to him. So you come in, I'm sorry, these slides seem rather close up, seem rather hard to see. If they are for you, I apologize. But you come in, and if you come in by car, you come in here, and there's a kitchen, but you come in, and the first space is the first source of light is a star-shaped courtyard. And the next source of light is the garden. And in the middle there's a roof light, which you can see this is a plan above. The floor of this courtyard on the first floor is glass, so it lights that space. So this was a very problematic location because there was no possibility of putting windows in this wall because it was a party wall. And so as I'll show you the slides, I'll explain the attitude to it. This section shows you the ground floor with the first floor courtyard, garden, and Anish and Susanna's bedroom here, and a bathroom and a dressing room here, which is works rather beautifully. Actually, the light's rather appealing. So if you come in from the street with the glass door of the entrance behind you, this is what you see. You see a space which has got lightly reflective surfaces, a lacquer cabinet, a lightly polished stone floor, stainless steel, which we'll see more of later. So on the principle of a Dutch canal house where the bel étage is rather deep and a mirror is placed at the back of the bel étage just to sustain what little light enters the room, this is what we did here. Plus, of course, the capacity to use electric light, and this is a light trough. So all of it is an exercise in illusion, giving the sense that there's more light than there really is. So as one walks in, and you see this, some of these photographs are duplicative because they show Anish's artwork, so they were taken over a period of time. And you come into the space and begin to see the first courtyard. And then from inside, this is what the inside of the courtyard looks like. It has stainless steel for the reasons that I mentioned. And then this is part of their house, but over here would be the windows of the apartment building. So it's primarily a light source. And then walking further in, one sees the living room, down 2 steps, with a staircase leading up to the first floor. And that zenithal light, which is the floor of the courtyard on the first floor, and ahead of you, the garden, another slightly different view with artworks in it and furniture. And the staircase, which has stainless steel in it for the reasons that I mentioned, and that's a view of the glass floor. So in all ways, we were seeking to get light into the plan in a gentle way, and even in front of the garden, a window. And then the garden itself, which is very small but very beautiful, very charming place to be. It has a small pond in it where the children keep frogs or whatever they keep in ponds, and more views. And what can I say? The connection between the living room and the bedroom is a corridor with books in it. So there's always habitable space going through the house. You know, the big space, which is articulated by the courtyards. So you know, what I know, having designed lofts, is that if you design a very large space and you let it be seen the whole time, quickly it becomes a very small space. So this is about delay and articulation, about sustaining the pleasures of a space. And Anish and Susanna's bedroom and the staircase which goes down into the bathroom, and the bathroom. I don't really have very good photographs of the bathroom, but it's again, because it's in the basement, again, light is an issue. Now we have made a number of projects in the Netherlands, which I'll show you too. The first one is an apartment building in Overhoeks in Amsterdam. A rather interesting experience working in Holland. The location, this was before the building was built. This is the River Eye from the central station. And this whole terrain was the Shell Petroleum research establishment. And this tower remains, but all the rest was removed. And let me just now show you the development plan. This is what you might say, a typical Dutch rendering done by a developer, you know, soulless and East European in its character, not by us. But it shows the kind of madness and yet rationality of working in Holland. I love working in Holland. When I started working on this project, we had a number of very large workshops with all the architects, and Jo Kuhne, who had been previously the Reichsbaumeister, stood up in his kind of lordly fashion and strode to the window of the tower where we were having the workshop, and looked from the window to OMA's scheme on the other side of the river, which is all made of stucco, and he said, "We don't want this, we want Paris, and Paris is made of stone." So then I went away thinking that all of these architects would respond, and came back and found, of course, the sport in Holland is for the architects to screw the master plan into the floorboards and make its life a misery. So everybody was designing in different colors of brick, and only Alvaro Caesar and I built in stone. So there's a tiny piece of New York here, and the rest is kind of mayhem. And there's a reason for it, I think, which is that Dutch housing clients they like variety. You know, they're at home with a kind of zoo, architectural zoo, and in a way I respect that. But so we got this site here, and Caesar, who's adorable, but got the building in front. So our view of the rivers, we haven't got one. You know, we didn't get one, and for that reason, I'll show you what we did. I'll show you what we did. Well, I'll show it to you in a minute. These are some plans, but we got the scheme. The scheme had been sort of typically in Holland. The developer says, "Would you like to do an apartment building?" And your heart beats fast, and you say, "Yes." And then they say, "The garage is already built." You know, so, and then you get the scheme, and you realize that it's been worked on by about 5 different architects, and we got a scheme where I think one apartment plan was made to do about 50 different jobs, and we thought, you know, we're British, we can do. So we did about 100 apartment plans and kind of lost our shirt financially, but it's very popular, this place. You come in and there's an entrance hall, and then we were able to get some 3 apartments, and then this is south and that's north, and so the corners, you know, we had to get some kind of west light on the corners. So it's very interesting working in Holland. The developer's got lots of very interesting views, very productive, and actually, until the crash, I have nothing but admiration for the way that Holland provided houses for its citizens. You know, it was a fantastic, historically important effort, and I'm very proud we were part of that. And then on the upper floors, it's like that. But then part of the urban design was that the top floor had to be set back. And we also jammed 4 penthouses on the roof as well. Being English, you know, English architects are very opportunistic. It's very interesting. You get used to squeezing lots of possibilities out of jobs. And this is what it looks like. In order to see around Caesar's building, we've got these giant balconies, you know, so you can look around, you can see the river, and they have glass floors. And because they have glass floors or glass block floors, the light in the apartment underneath is unaffected. But what's happened is that this is through the luck of the people that chose to buy this building, buy apartments in this building. Is a fantastic community feeling, and so they do. And this happens in Holland a lot. But they've had a kind of opera where they've played on the balconies. And another building that I'll show you close to the end. I'll tell you another story about that. But it's very charming. You know, the people who buy apartments in Holland are very, very active. All of the interiors have been completely redone by them. I mean, the most extraordinary way. You visit and, you know, they're very charming but very mad, and I do like working there. So you can see that somehow this has a certain quality that you're looking into the sky, and often an apartment will have 2 balconies. It will have one facing into the public area and one facing out, so that you can have a private life and a public life. And we made a decision to use just two types of window, a French window and another window, and to use a German travertine, which the name of which I forget, but it works. It has a certain curiously cosmopolitan feeling about it, I'm told. And then again, you can see the shell tower in the background. To our immense surprise, we were selected to do an embassy for the British government, and we went through a security procedure. You have to be vetted by the Foreign Office, and you get asked questions by a retired policeman, and the retired policeman said, "Did I belong to any left-wing political societies in my youth?" And I said, "Yes, of course I did." And they said, "Did you experiment with drugs?" And I said, "Well, I did too." And what was your sex life like? And I said, "Well, it was healthy." And then we went back to the office, and all of my colleagues, who are much shrewder than I, had been given 5-year security clearances, and I was given a year. And I said, "Why is that?" And they said, "Because you're stupid and you didn't lie, you know." So there you are. So I mean, this is a security issue. But what's an embassy? An embassy effectively is an office building with espionage. So this is these are the public spaces. That huge floor is all of the departments of the of the embassy. Then the ambassador's floor, and this floor, which looks like a plant room, is actually jammed with surveillance equipment. But I didn't tell you that. Only you and 5,000 other people know that in every embassy, the top floor is where the espionage is carried on. And then there's a kind of curious, without seeming like a functionalist, there's a curious situation in embassies, which is that only certain departments can go above other departments in case they're listening devices. And so the shape of the embassy, that was part of that, but it's a kind of curiously neoclassical element. You know, it's a blank facade with a portico on it, as I'll show. And then each side is a garden, a roof garden. So this facade, if you're in a country which decides to join up with George Bush and invade other people's countries, for about 25 years afterwards, people will want to destroy your embassies, just to let you know that. And so this facade is a double facade. The outer facade is sacrificial in the event of a blast. The inside is very strong, and the glass in the double glazed units is 40 millimeters thick. I mean, you could fire a pistol at this and it would just laugh. And it's a double facade because the Polish climate is very cold in winter and very hot in summer, and you have to control temperature. And embassies are very bad at maintaining their buildings. So if you were to put blinds on the outside, they would all be left broken. So this is a very low-tech solution. It's a double facade which in the winter is sealed top and bottom, in the summer is ventilated top and bottom, and it just about works. But it also produces a kind of imagery that we like. When you make an embassy, you imagine that there would be advice from the Foreign Office about what it should look like. But actually there isn't. And England's a curious place. I mean, in some ways it's great, in other ways it's damnable, like everybody's country. But in the UK, and probably in other places, the position is that the design of an embassy is left to the designer as a mark of the creative capacity of the country, which is great. So in a way, we were left to choose what representational qualities would have this building would have. And so what I was looking for was a facade which reflected the surrounding world, within which there was a much more sober and tougher facade. So there was an image to the public of openness and generosity, but also security and strength. And I think in a time when the Western democracies are being assailed by very conservative forces. It's the right thing to do. On the roof, this is the Polish climate. This, by now, I hope, is a series of parterre hedges, and these are spaces where the ambassador can come and discuss politics with those friends of freedom like Kim Il-jung and Saddam Hussein, you know, in some kind of private place surrounded by flowers. And the facade has a portico. I mean, you need what's very interesting about embassies is how buildings are used representationally, so the portico is important. Only ambassadors and heads of state arrive there, and so it's it has this entrance, the coat of arms on the door, which purely by accident, when the doors open, Scotland goes one way and England goes another way. So even as an architect, you can be forward-looking. But this it's romantic. Despite the, let's say, minimality of the facade, there is some romance here. So arriving here has a romantic quality. Now, inside there are public rooms which, if you look, this space is a sort of typical embassy space which doesn't know if it wants to be an art gallery or a place to advertise motor cars or to have a conference, and it can be shut off from. I'll just do that again. Shut off. Wait for it. Yeah, and but the floor that really is most interesting for me is the working space for the embassy, and this facade, as you'll see in a second, is the double facade. So it's very, very quiet, and the area is surrounded by trees. But in the middle of the space is a courtyard with planting in it. You can't go out into it. It's simply to bring light to the plan. And it's probably better seen here. So with a carpet and acoustic singing, it's a very, very quiet and concentrated workplace. And we spent a lot of time making the interior of the building be a facade as much as the outside. But when you come into an embassy, you go through a search procedure, which is invasive. And if you're when you used to come for a visa, I think now you don't do it. I think you do it online. But when you come for a visa, you're in every embassy. You're directed around the back of the building, and in a rather mean-minded way. I mean, many times in the past, I've stood outside the American embassy in the pouring rain with my documents, and it's better now, but we didn't want to do that. So when you come in as a consular visa person, you go through the search area, which is here, but you go down a pathway which has a glass fence, so you can enjoy all of this. You can see it, and then you go around the back, and there's an entrance which is as elegant as the one at the front, and that's where you go for your visa. And the back of the building doesn't have this double facade on it. It has a more articulated version of the interior facade. And so again, from a simple series of motifs, we were able to provide a kind of variety and change. And when you are in there, you get some dignity and repose, and you're cared for. The embassy cares for you as much as it cares for anybody else, or the architecture of the embassy does that. In Copenhagen, we were approached about 5 years ago by a client who appeared in our office and said, would we like to do a project in central Copenhagen? Hearts beating fast. We said, yes. What is it? And they said, we can't tell you. And then they went away, and they came back and they told us a little bit more. And then they went away again, and they came back and they said, you've got the job. And this has never happened before or since. But it was a location in central. This is the building that we made. It's next to what's called the Marble Church, and it's in environs which are a Beaux-Arts surroundings. This whole part of Copenhagen was begun in about 1720, I believe, as a Rococo district under the auspices of King Frederick, and then they ran out of money very quickly. And if you know Copenhagen, the 4 very beautiful palaces around an octagonal plaza were the beginning. And then the end was to have been this church, but it never got built because they ran out of money. And in the end, a developer called Tietgens bought the church and bought the whole area of land and said that he would finish the church provided he could build apartments around it for sale. And so the architecture of these buildings is less good, far less good than the original. The church is rather good, in fact, I must say. And but Tietgens was never able to buy this corner of the square. The owners refused to sell it. So it was a cause célèbre in Copenhagen, the unfinished square. And it was set as a student project. Every student of architecture in Copenhagen at one time or another has made a project for that. So for us it was sort of peculiar that we would get it. But we got it through the fact that we made the Red House, and the Red House's ability to be a building of the present time and yet accommodating architecture from the past. And the brief was to make a building of these times, which completed this architecture. And you can see that it does. You know, it's a very well. We started from the Beaux-Arts. It's interesting. You know, if you look at Beaux-Arts architecture, even in its most reduced form, in Barcelona, for example, or parts of Paris, it's one of the styles of architecture that was able to produce habitable apartments, form public spaces between it. It had a great number of answers for a lot of human conditions. And so for us, we decided we would take that style as a beginning, you know, because in the same way as the staircase in the Red House uses a technology that's been around for 500 years, it seemed to us that if the intelligence in Beaux-Arts City was still rich, we should use it. So I'll just, the next slide is the one I think it is. So we said, look, you know, we would make a 3-part division here. And although in this building, the pilasters are decorative, in this building, the pilasters are the structure. So this is a building which is of the modern movement, or after the modern movement. This is a building before the modern movement. These windows would be big, like they are in the modern movement, unlike these windows, which are small. This space would be a beautiful penthouse, unlike the attic here. These balconies would be habitable, whereas these are honorific. So it takes the Beaux-Arts formal compositional structures, and it addresses issues which were brought into the present by the modern movement. And it does a strange thing. I mean, this is a very strange elevation. One thing I haven't said is that not only did it have to complete this ensemble, but it had to deal with these buildings, which are never going to be replaced. They're from the period before the construction of this. So my hope, I mean, it's for you to judge, but my hope is that by the way that this geometric facade exists, it has a relationship to the constructivist facade of this, and that the open loggias here have a relation to what have occurred on the roofs of these buildings, which are informal roof gardens. And the whole of the square, although it's very formal in the majority, is the majority of its parts is actually used very informally. And it was that informality of use that we somehow wanted to capture here. And I don't have a photograph of the side, but the side elevation, perhaps before I say what I'm going to say, I should say that the front apartments, there's an apartment at the front and an apartment at the back. The ones on the front have those loggias that I showed you. In the back, they have a south-facing balcony in here, and they're more loft-like. But this side elevation is what occurs often in cities. It's that sort of unregulated type of facade, which is not made to be seen, but actually provides a strength to a city of the unexpected. And so from the street side, this model shows that we had another issue, which is that unlike this pavilion here, the buildings on the street that this completed were actually flat-fronted buildings. And so we took that vocabulary and we made it a three-part invention like this. And this is actually smaller than the pavilion here, but we made it seem as though it was about the same size. And one thing that we did is we discovered that if you take the ornament off of this building, that actually, in our view, you have to increase the size of the projections to compensate, to make it bolder. So when you take a style apart, it's very interesting to discover what you find. And this, so this is the actual facade on the street with the marble church behind it. And the interior plays a role too. So when you're here, you see these sculptures on the parapet of the church and the building opposite, and even the bathroom has its presence in the city. So this is a very, the Danish public who are very warm about this building because they say it lets them see aspects of Copenhagen that they'd forgotten. And it was rented, it's a rental place, but it was rented immediately by a specific type of person that's urban, wants to live in the center of the city and wants to have this kind of presence within the fabric of the city. Nearing the end now, this is another building that we won in competition in Lolland in Denmark, and it's an art museum on a fabulous site. This is the building, and I'll show you the location before the building was made. But well, let me show you. The building that we made is here now. But this is a very typical Danish farm yard. It has a beautiful barn here, a variety of different houses in different styles. And then, if you look back, there's a pond, an animal pond. That's the barn. And then at the back here, there's a manor house in a sort of country classical manor house. Not excessively beautiful, but actually vital. And inside, each room has a slightly different classical interior. All the floors are slightly different. At the back, at the front, there's a moat. At the back, there's an English landscape garden. And it has a tradition of engagement with the arts, so that Carl Nielsen, the Danish composer, was given a residency here, and they still have musical concerts. But also up here, there are rooms where people come to stay because the countryside is so beautiful. And it's absolutely flat as can be, and it goes into the sea through a salt flats. It's a bird reserve into the sea, so it's very beautiful. Now, when we arrived to look at the site, the competition brief had suggested very strongly that the new building would finish or close the side of the courtyard. And when we looked, we thought that this view was so spectacular, we wanted to make it a priority in the scheme. So this rendering, which I think won us the competition, showed that what we wanted to do was to make it that when you came in, the first thing you saw was the landscape, and then the second thing you saw was our building. And the manor house, just to orientate you, is over there. And that was, actually they liked that. And this is actually what it's like. It does, when you come in, you do see the countryside and this building, which is much more abstract than the other buildings that I've shown, but also has some scalar relationships to the surroundings, as I'll show. And so, after having seen that view, the front of the building steps out and creates a place, sort of a smaller scale, with a portico in it, and then you approach the building. And I'm very interested in how public buildings, or in fact any buildings, create a small, informal community of people who don't know each other, bring them into proximity and then disperse them. So just to show you the plan, that place is there. So the view is in this way. And the organization of the building is that all of this is the entrance. It's the bookshop, the cafe. There's a lecture theatre and an art room and toilets and cloakrooms. And then the gallery itself is, the galleries themselves are arranged along this long corridor, and down here are rooms for small-scale paintings. This is a temporary exhibition space, and then this is for the Modernist Collection. And I need to tell you that this painting collection is a permanent collection. So we knew what we were designing for. And so that will become clear when I show you the nature of the room. So here's the cafe with two people falling in love in a building. It breaks my heart. What can I say? Maybe they're planning a bank robbery, I don't know. But, who knows what they're doing. And then from that space you see, through the art room, you see an apple orchard. And what I think had occurred instinctively or intuitively was that the view of the landscape was used as a way of orienting you. So first of all, you see it and then it's taken away, and then in the cafe you see another aspect of the landscape. And throughout the building, you rediscover views of the landscape. Because although this isn't a big art museum, it's primarily top-lit rooms, because of course you want to maximize the amount of hanging space. And so those moments where you see the outside contextualize that experience of looking at art, as I'll show. So the central space is like this. You know, it has a long gallery there, and then we'll look at this. We'll look at this gallery, and it's a temporary exhibition space. This is a statue wondering when I'm going to finish the lecture. Is he going to be long? He's saying, looking at his watch. This is a gallery which has an array of roof lights above a gridded ceiling, and so you can change the daylighting in so that one corner can be dark and other parts of it can be light. So it's, let's say, it's suitable for, as we see here, this is low lighting, but you could have video and film at one end, and you could have painting and sculpture at the other. And at the other end of the room, a different type of space, which is for the collection from Impressionism onward. And all of these paintings are by Danish artists, and they're all in the European style. So none of them are brilliant. There's some Asger Jorns, which are good. Most of it, it's workmanlike stuff, but it has a very powerful local quality. And some of the paintings actually show the location of Fuglsang in them. So as a collection, it has tremendous local power. People are proud of it. It locates them. So it's another way that art can function. And in fact, more and more, I'm interested in how this social function of art can be at the center of an art building, instead of more and more art making more and more money. Let's look at other functions for art. So I'm a bit kind of I'm a different kind of art gallery designer to everybody else. But this if you come back across here, there's another suite of rooms which have a decorated ceiling. We designed this decor. It has a gold ceiling, and it's specifically for paintings of this kind of scale with gold frames. And you may remember that in the image that I showed, there were three diagonally placed roof lights, and this is one of them. So it brings light onto the floor, and it's very tall, intentionally tall, so that sunlight doesn't penetrate. It might exist up here and might brighten the light color in the room. The roof light has light control on it, and it means that you can get 50 lux on the paintings, but the room itself feels daylit, because the intensity and light color of daylight change, and the room changes, but the paintings, because they're lit by electric light, will stay the same. So it's an illusion of being a daylit room. And these rooms are joined enfilade, and they're done that way because, from a requirement of the client, they wanted different groups of people to be able to go through the museum in their own way. So, for example, a single person looking at a painting might want to avoid a large group of people led by a guide who was speaking. So you can find several routes through this space. And I will say this, that the client group for this project spent a year writing this brief with the aid of an architect, and it was impeccable. It was really an exciting brief to work with, and very considered. And at the end of that enfilade, a room for plaster casts, which, not being light sensitive, can have a window to the outside. And then from that room, you go back into the corridor and you find a room at the end. A room at the end which, again, was part of the client's brief, simply a room to look at the landscape, or in this case, to look at the landscape growing, which it was doing at the time. And it's marvelous, actually. People do just go and sit there. They sit after looking at paintings, and they rest their eyes, and it's really a unique thought from this group of people. And the building, again, although abstract, it understands that these buildings, as in the buildings next to the Copenhagen project, these buildings from this period had a high level of abstraction, a high prismatic quality. And so these two types of abstraction can talk to each other. The final project, no, it's not the final project. The final project is the building we're doing in Deinze. But the penultimate project is this. It's in the west of Amsterdam. There are 3 buildings which were master planned by Jorke Pan. Sadly died. Good plan. What happened was that Amsterdam, as in the project I showed on the river, Amsterdam is always looking for, or was always looking for, what's called brownfield sites to build housing. And so originally there was a hospital here, which I haven't seen it, but by the description filled the whole site and was very tall. And Jo's scheme brought light into the back of the site and also continued the lines of the city. And it's, of course, a simplistic gesture, but it's a very good simplistic gesture. And the other element of the scheme was that each building had to have its own internal court. And these 3 buildings have very different functions. This one is social housing, this is a psychiatric clinic, and our building, which was commissioned by the Housing Association Het Oosten, is a flexible building. It's a building which is flexible in plan. It has a facade with a life of 200 years. It's called a solid. And here it is. It's these facades are self-supporting. They've got a little bit of restraint, but they're self-supporting. This is porphyry. Very, very solid and durable materials. A series of decorative moves in it. I'm very interested in the kind of anonymous building that you find in Chicago at the turn of the 20th century, where they are at a city scale in their conception, and yet they have measured amounts of detail and incident. And as we look, I think you'll find that this detailing, there's something which catches your eye, something that gives pleasure, but the building itself is rather sober and is at the scale of the city. And it's planned, on the ground floor plan, there's a courtyard. And then this has the capacity to be things like nurseries. This has the capacity to be more commercial. And so this whole courtyard becomes an extension of the street in time. And then the floors above, this isn't a typical floor, but this end, which is, I'll explain in a second, these are lofts. They have redundant amounts of service risers and lifts. So you can configure them, as most people have done, entered through here, but you could arrange it as a conventional office with a staircase in the middle. A corridor in the middle. And then on the south-facing side, it has a sort of redundant amount of balconies, so that wherever you partition the space, you will get a balcony. And this corner, which I particularly like, shows what I said about detail. That somehow there was something I learned from looking at Solowit's wall drawings and sculptures, which is that you can start from a very simple motif, in this case, which was a gridded structure at the scale of the city, and then you can develop it in very simple ways to address issues and needs. And then let's say the excitement and the interest comes through solving necessary issues, but in an interesting way. And so, for example, this balcony detail and this all part of a vocabulary of similar forms moving in and out. This one is a fixed window. This is an opening window and a fixed panel. These windows open behind the balcony. So you get a variety of things happening within a similar vocabulary. And we'll look at the inside now. So it has these, again, it has a glass-floor balconies. What I want to say here is that it also has imagery, and for me, it's beginning to become important that imagery, to find the imagery in the building, because when you remember something, you remember it through a number of specific images. And I think buildings can benefit from being memorable. They can benefit, people can have a greater sense of their location through memorable imagery. And it's interesting, I went just recently, we were looking at it for an RIBA prize, and up here there's a hair artist who cuts hair in his apartment. All the apartments have been done by the people themselves, and he said that every month they have a huge dinner with tables and candles around the balcony. It's very romantic, and it's there. You know, in Amsterdam, any space outdoors will be used, so it has a certain appeal to an Amsterdam culture. But what I want to say is that as you walk through the building, as you go up it, you find that things happen. You know, its relationship to the exterior world becomes visible, and so from a simple motif, you get a lot of richness. And there are certain moments where, for example, the roof light reflects the sky, and the building is less material than it seems less material than it actually is. Now, the final project in Deinze we're still detailing, and this is the rendering with which we won the competition. It's the administrative centre is essentially a town hall with a Raadzaal, and so this is the proposition that we made was that this would be a low-energy building. It wouldn't have any cooling. Well, it wouldn't have any air conditioning. And in fact, it has cooling from, it now has ground source cooling. But that these would be loges that shaded the facade. And so you could have natural ventilation, you could have opening windows, very tall ceilings so you could work by daylight, an exposed concrete soffit so that you could get nighttime cooling. And the interior spaces this is the Raadzaal. This is very early drawing of the facade, and the thought was that this facade might become occupied, and that the Raadzaal would have a decor on the ceiling, which it will have, I think, a Rail de Kaiser ceiling. And then the interior of the offices, which would be extremely simple. You know, there would be the loges and then the office space, very, very, rather a lot of exposed concrete, very simple. And then the romantic thought, I mean, this probably won't happen, but the romantic thought was that these loges would be spaces where people could have private conversations, or you know, that you actually would give a space outside the workspace and reduce the oppressiveness of the workspace by having some escape. But it also means that the facade is much easier to handle because the fenestration and the stonework are on different planes. And these very early models show the intent of the building, that the Raadzaal at night would be visible. They like this very much. You know, it's an extremely simple gesture. I mean, perhaps even corny, but this, in a way, is how often these projects work. And it's there's a church here, and this building, although it's different in form from the church, its height and proportions are fairly similar. So the elements of this locale, which is being made into something through some landscaping by Marie-José, the elements here are the river, the church, and our building. And it will be the first building that you see when you come into Deinze across the bridge. And it also has a way of embracing the shape of the river to create a public space in front of it. And then here is a rather charming art museum from the 60s. And just recently, a competition was won with a new building here by We buy Flemish practice, which will be quite close to our building. And you can see that as you develop a building, it puts on weight, you know, like we all do. As it gets older, it gets fatter. And the question is to preserve the poetics of the space while absorbing those necessary additions. And one of the ways to keep the elegance is to choose a stone. And this is a stone that we're proposing. It hasn't been selected yet, but we hope it will be. It's a Seppo stone from Italy. And the argument is that it has great dignity. And it also, this is not dissimilar to the stone in the church. So it's different, but it has a degree of animation which matches that. And in a building which is as plain as the building that we're designing, you need a level of detail in the material itself. But Marie-José, we're very lucky. Marie-José van Hey is doing the landscaping. She had originally made landscaping over here, and she's going to continue that and change the edge of the riverbank in a way that's very beautiful. That's the plan. So this edge becomes like a castle, so its figure really, I think, enhances the shape of the building. And then there's planting around here, which all landscaping looks a little strange, but it's experiential. And what I've seen Marie-José do on the other side of the river is very, very, very appealing. So to work with her is great. So this is her drawing, not my drawing. It's her drawing of how the garden will look. It has the same intention as the models that I showed earlier to show the spirit of the project. And the question for us now is to work on this project and to bring it to the same kind of poetic conclusion in its materiality as we did in the project in Amsterdam. Thank you.